Well, first of all, I want to welcome Father Marc. Thank him very much for coming to speak to us today. Father Marc might remember we were once classmates. Not too long in our memory, it was very recent. It was probably before most of you were born, though. So not that long ago to us, maybe a lifetime ago
It's
to
the
you.
time ago when I had hair. I can't remember if you were already trending with the
Uh,
shaved head. I don't remember or
Trending
not.
down, but no, I had much more up top, less so down here, but it's just migrated south.
My
Um,
beard, when I do it, it goes all white, so I don't have the blessing of having a
okay.
shaved head as well as a nice clear beard. But oh well, that's life.
Right, such as it is, such as it is. And it's always a pleasure to speak with Father Marc. So I'm very happy to hear from him today, and so and as many of our students are as well. Here, maybe just to help out Father Marc a little bit, why don't you just put into the chat where you are from, because we are an online academy, so we have students from many different places. If you just put into the chat, just give them a little bit of a context.
I'll give you my last place of residence. My father was in the military, so I just Cold Lake, Alberta, which is about 3 hours northeast of here. But we lived in Germany for a little bit of my youth on Vancouver Island in Comox, which is just in mid island, and then Cold Lake for most of my life. My dad was in the military, worked in computers, is what he ended up doing, and then he mustered out and he worked for Department of National Defense, doing the same thing, just doing mainframe programming. So never got a degree per se, but he did all his learning in the military, which is equal or better sometimes than what he would have gotten in university. And it was practical on hands. He was programming all these military things. So it's a pretty amazing experience for him. For a man who
Okay.
had high school education to be basically a master's or a doctorate level learning in terms of programming and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. The military took him a long way for sure.
Yes. Okay. Oh, fascinating. Fascinating.
You are all from all over. We even got some people from Vancouver, or from Washington State. There it looks like.
Yes. So yes. So this is us, and I think we're ready to roll. So Father Marc, do you want to start with a prayer, or usually we start with a prayer before we begin? Maybe defer to our if you'd like to, or
I can do it.
excellent. You've done this before. Okay.
Yes, I've done it many times. Almighty God, we just take this opportunity of visiting over this Zoom meeting. We ask you to bless us with your spirit and presence. I help my conversation as I talk about my past and my story, that it may resonate with these young people and they may bring questions to the forefront that they may have, and have an opportunity to have a good discussion this morning. May it be fruitful, may it be something that is helpful and good for these young people. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Okay. So I guess Mrs. Wright, do we have to change controls or anything, or Father Marc, you just got this?
If you have a presentation, I think you can go ahead and share. If you don't, then go ahead and talk.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I didn't prepare a presentation. I didn't know you wanted me to do any of that kind of stuff. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes, talk about my story, where I'm from, and how I meandered through life and got to where I am. And I think that could be good enough. That's what they, Justine, Mrs. Wright, I think we go by the proper name,
Yes.
talked to me about. So I'll do that. I grew up Catholic. Like I said, my father was in the military. My mother was a nurse, registered nurse, and so wonderful portable career. Wherever dad happened to be transferred, she was able to get work as much or as little as she wanted to. She spent a lot of time doing a little more part-time work so she could spend more time with us as we were growing up. Again, really cool. I grew up Catholic all of my life. But as I got into my teenage years, I dealt with a lot of different things, as many of you do in different ways. I personally was a very emotional young man, still am very naturally emotive. But I struggled with that because I just didn't feel loved by my dad. But that's just because my dad was old school. He didn't know how to say, I love you or any of that kind of stuff. Hardly ever talked to me in a very meaningful way. He does now as an older person, but when he was young, he just couldn't do that. He's the kind of guy that made sure my car had all its tires working properly and made sure we had stuff and things like that. That's my dad, but he just didn't have the ability to relate. He was not a emotive person, neither was he extroverted like me. He's a very introverted, private man. So which shocks me to know him now as an adult. Like, he's completely switched to my mother's more like him than anything. It's funny. It's just the way these things go. But when I was younger, I felt that, and I didn't know how to deal with that. And I didn't know how to reach out or talk to people about that too. So, I mean, that really stirred in me all these private things you can't talk to somebody about that can be helpful. That's a third party, so to speak, sometimes can make a big difference. What happened to me is I grew up Catholic, but I mean, I didn't hate going to church and all that, but I didn't want to. I didn't really have a relationship with Jesus in a very real way in his church. But we grew up, when we moved up to Cold Lake, we actually don't live in Cold Lake when we were there. We lived in a little hamlet called Cherry Grove. And Cherry Grove was the northernmost settlement of Mormons north of Cardston. They came up during the time of Brigham Young way back when, in the 1800s, early 1900s, settled in Cardston. Some people eventually moved up to where Cherry Grove is, funny as that may sound. It's several hours north, but a whole bunch of Mormon families there. So as I grew up in that area, I met lots of Mormon young men that were there, and other people, men and women, young people that I began to associate with. And what I found when I just associated with them is that I found that I appreciated that they believed so strongly in their religion and their faith, and they practiced it. They definitely treated me with love and respect, and I found that just amazing. They welcomed me in to their families and then just into their community in a very real way. So when they started talking to me about faith, my friends did. For Mormons, what they will often do is talk about the Book of Mormon, because it's so central to who they are as Mormon people, that you read it and pray. Read it, pray about it, and ask God if it's true. And if it's true, then we have something to offer you. It's kind of the basic shtick. And I did. Well, what happened actually, I was so just involved in myself that I never just asked for a Book of Mormon. I actually took one. I stole it. They later laughed at me and said, you just had to ask. But I was so caught up in not wanting to reveal myself, a very teenage kind of thing for sure. But eventually I read it once and just kind of put it aside. I never really read it all the way. But the second time I went through and read it, I really wanted to read it. I was intent of just, okay, what is this all about? These people I know by their practice, but also by their love. But I wanted to see what this was all about. So I read through the entire Book of Mormon, and I got down on my knees and I prayed about it. I remember as a teenager doing that, and I didn't know how to pray. So I didn't ask anybody. I thought I was, I don't know, like a normal person that way. But I just prayed really hard, like a tube of toothpaste. I just squeezed and really prayed. Just thought, talk God with lots of intensity. I remember laying on my bed and nothing happened. And then I went back down and I said, maybe I didn't pray hard enough. So I did it the second time and laid down on my bed. But when I did it that time, for whatever reason, my eyes were drawn to this condensation, this water dripping down on the wall of my basement room. And when I looked at that, something about that just triggered me. And then from the tip of my head to the tip of my feet, I felt this incredible sense of peace and love. In that moment, I just knew that God was real and that he loved me. And because I had gotten that from reading the Book of Mormon and praying like I did, I just said, okay, I want this. And so I went gung-ho. I began to learn about the Mormon faith, and I began to live the Mormon faith the best way I can. I had a good friend of mine that had helped me along in this journey, and he's the one that challenged me to read the Book of Mormon and to really take it seriously. And I did. And what happened with that is I began to live the faith. Eventually, I wanted to join the Mormon faith. That was an interesting conversation with my parents. But I had the courage to talk to them about that. And my mom and my dad didn't kind of were concerned that I was being brainwashed and stuff like that. And I looked at it and I said, no, I'm not being brainwashed. This is all me. I mean, my friends are strong-minded and all that kind of stuff, but I wasn't being brainwashed. I knew that much, but I really felt that. They said no, not to join the faith. I was 15, 16, going on 16. So they asked me to wait till I was 18, but they allowed me to go to church. So I went to church with the Mormon community. There was a time there before actually I went to Catholic church and went there with my mom. And until that, I just really wanted to go to the Mormon church. And so eventually I did. For a couple of years, I was eventually baptized. I served a mission in South America. I went down to Sao Paulo, Brazil, which is on the southern-ish a little north of southern part of Brazil. I speak Portuguese because of that. And yeah, came back off that mission, got married I was married for about 3 years. And unfortunately, I broke down and I got divorced. And then that took me I was married when I was 24. Basically, when I was 28, I began to feel this. I loved my Mormon community, and the city was different than when I was in Cherry Grove. I mean, that was where I knew the people the best. But in the city, it was a good community, but I began to feel a great deal of emptiness in my life. Something was just not there. It was an emptiness that this was palatable. It was emotional feeling, but it was very real for me. And I started praying about that, like the whole time I had been with the Mormons, and really, really praying about it. And the answer I kept getting back is, you should go back to the faith of your parents. And it was interesting discernment, because I knew that wasn't coming from me, because that made no sense to me. I knew it wasn't coming from anybody else, because I really hadn't discussed that with too many other people, if any. I don't remember discussing about it at all. It was a very private thing. And so it was either God or it was the devil. It was either coming from God or something else. And I kept praying about it. That same feeling that I felt when I first felt that reading the Book of Mormon and praying about it came back to me. And so finally, I just, over time, talked to some people about it, how to become Catholic again. And he just mentioned, well, you're baptized Catholic, you received all the sacraments, you just need to go to the Sacrament of Reconciliation. And so I did that. I went back to the Sacrament of Reconciliation, confessed my sins for the last 12 years, and then I went to Mass for the first time. It was a daily Mass. It wasn't on the weekend, but I went to a daily Mass. And then when I did that for the very first time to receive, I went and received communion. And all of a sudden, that hunger went completely away. I was just filled again. And then it felt like I woke up, like the prodigal son, he just woke up. And I just all of a sudden began to realize, oh, okay, I was proved in front of me. There's something here within the Catholic Mass, within the Catholic Church. And I began to read the Catholic teachings, I would say, really for the first time. I really didn't read it as much. Like with the Mormons, I just ate it up. I read everything that I could get my hands on. And so because of that, I intellectually understood the faith, and I strove to live it. I think I did a fairly good job in my youthful zeal. Youthful zeal, you tend to do more maybe than is necessary, but I did live the faith. And when I learned the Catholic faith, I began to realize that almost everything that I had come to believe as a Mormon, that I had come to know to be true and to practice in my life, the Catholic Church had already been teaching. I just hadn't realized it. And so I eventually came back to the Catholic faith. I started going to daily Mass and going to Sunday Mass, became a practicing Catholic. And it was just a bit of a shift over, different community and all that. That took a little bit of shifting, because it was just not the same level of immense community that I had with the Mormons. But the thing is, though, nonetheless, I felt very strongly it was true, is where God wanted me to be. Eventually, what happened is I started to feel a tap on my shoulder that, have you ever thought of being a priest? And that kept repeating over and over again. And I looked into it. I personally, when I got that kind of message, my natural emotional reaction to it is, I'm not good enough to be a priest. And that's not true. I am not good enough to be a priest. I'm still not good enough on my own to be a priest. But God kept calling me. And I just said, okay. Or finally, I just said, I'll take that next step. And I worked through the vocations director with the Archdiocese, and eventually I came into the seminary. And the rest is history. I was in the seminary, and eventually I was ordained a priest in 2006 on the day the Oilers lost to Carolina. And so I know that the Oilers have not won the Stanley Cup for exactly the same number of years that I have been a Catholic priest. So there you go. Actually, that's a great story, because all my friends were coming in and watching the game before they came to the Mass and stuff like that. There was even a priest there that of happy memory. He's passed away now, but he was listening to the game during the Mass. There was actually a guy, my brother pointed out to me, that when I was ordained a priest, he was just laughing himself silly, because one of the choir members was actually listening to the game with an Oilers jersey on. And he knew exactly what the score was, because every time Carolina scored, he knew. The guy would react. He said, my brother is basically an agnostic, but it's just, I thought it was the funniest thing. I was completely oblivious to all of that. My senses were all heightened, because I could hear the birds chirping at the beginning of Mass outside the windows and stuff like that. and all sorts of things. So it's kind of cool. It was a neat experience. And I was ordained a priest. It's interesting, if I go a few years back before I was even in the seminary, I remember working a gas station job that I had. And I kind of love-hate relationship with that job. I did it because I needed money to go through my undergraduate degree. And there's moments I'd hate that job, and there's moments I would like that job, and it was kind of cyclical. It went up and down. But I remember one night just getting so upset, like, oh, Lord, when am I going to be happy? When am I going to be happy in my life? Because there's moments I wasn't happy. And I remember the answer coming back one day that you'd be happy when you're a priest. And that there's very strong messages that came to me, and it stuck with me throughout my entire time in the seminary. And once I was ordained a priest, I realized, yeah, I get what he was saying. Because I'm happy being a priest. I don't love sometimes the administrative work and sometimes the difficulty of dealing with people sometimes, but I love being a priest because I'm doing what I was created to be and do. So I found my, not my identity, I found that in Christ and in the church, but I found my purpose in my life. I found out where I'm supposed to be. You know, Mother Teresa talked about being God's pencil. I found out what kind of pencil I am. And so I'm happy being here and doing what I do. So, and I find great joy in it. And but it's like anything. I don't hate the job. I love being a priest. I still do to this very day. It's just sometimes I'm tired, or I just it's sometimes I get just at the man, you know. I find sometimes dealing with different people upper in the hierarchy or sometimes lay people can be fun. You know, I wish, my biggest wish for some people is that more people would listen and do. Sometimes they hear all these things, they let it flow over them. But it's not, to me, I don't care about that. I would rather they get in a relationship with Christ, but they would listen, try to live the gospel. And when they do that, it's amazing what happens in their life. But you talk about lots of stuff, it seems to go right over the surface. And I'm sorry, we're human beings. So I find people are really listen and are more open to you when they're in the middle of a crisis, when things are supposedly going good. But the thing is, I would say, prepare before. It's better before. In a crisis, you're at your weakest. So it's nice if you've already taken time. So when the crisis comes, and it will, and the difficulties come, they will, you'll be more prepared and you'll be able to be closer to God because you've already been doing that. But people don't realize the worth. The other thing I find with us Catholics and everyone really in religion, they just don't realize what they have. You know, and it's easy, I get it. You know, familiarity breeds contempt. You just get used to it. It's what you have. Having served a mission in Brazil, I realized coming back just how much we have. As much as we can complain about what we have, it's not as bad as it was in some of the favelas, the poor areas in Brazil, that we need to kind of have perspective, and people don't understand. And they don't get what we have. I wish everybody could really realize this, what great gift they have, and make use of it. It's a waste when we in the Catholic faith have so much that we can make use of in our life, for this life, but more importantly for the next life, to be ready for that when we die and live our lives in such a way that we reach there, that it's a waste. We need to do that. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. The only other thing I'll share, and then I'll open it up to questions if you wish, is I remember asking God after I came back to the Catholic faith. I said, God, when I prayed about the Book of Mormon, whether it was true or not, and you gave me such a strong, profound answer. So why did you do that? And I remember the answer I got back is because that was the first time you ever prayed to me. Why would I not answer you? I went, yeah, good point. And I realized, though, as hard as it may be at first, really practicing prayer will bring you to God in a profound way. Sometimes we're motivated by circumstances, because my friends were asking me to read the Book of Mormon, so there was peer pressure that way, but also a desire in my heart. There was something, maybe difficulty. But the thing with prayer is sometimes when there's a difficulty, you want your family member to be healed, or you're looking for one particular thing. That's not always the best way to approach prayer. The prayer is when you seek God and you finally get that connection. It takes time to get there. Most people takes months, sometimes longer. But once they're open, because prayer, is St. Augustine talks about, it stretches your soul. It's like learning how to breathe when you had major difficulties breathing. It takes time. Once you do that, then you can breathe. then you realize that I need to keep practicing these exercises to be able to keep breathing. But nonetheless, once you learn how to breathe, you go, oh, why did I ever breathe so shallowly before? But it takes that effort. But the thing is, though, you need to seek him. When you seek him, you will find him. You don't know when, and that's okay. Sometimes we need to let go of our control of when God answers things. I've never found God answers when I want him to answer. He answers when he's ready, but it's always when it is most opportune. It's funny, though. In all ways, God, most of my great prayers and answers have been when I got totally pissed off and angry. but at that moment, I find when you're pissed off and angry, you're finally honest, and you're open to hearing what God wants to say. Because oftentimes when we just, somewhat timidly wanted to do that, So prayer to me is such an important thing. If you pray, you really pray, you will encounter God. It may not be what you're seeking, but it will be what you need. And you need to be serious about it for a period of time. As much time as it takes to actually build up physical fitness and stuff like that, it'll take that to build up your spiritual fitness. But once you do it, you'll realize, why did I live anyway like this before? But most of my experience is because, thank God to my Mormon friends, they encouraged me to learn how to pray, and I learned how to do that as much as I have been able to. So my whole life has been this relationship of prayer with God and all the other things that came with it. So anyway, that's my story in a nutshell. I don't know if you have any particular questions about that or anything. That'd be fine.
As soon as you guys can feel brave and raise your hand, unmute, or you can put it in the chat. So Laura asks, what is something you think young people are the most susceptible to, and what in turn should we be vigilant in to protect our relationship with Christ? So what is something you think young people are the most susceptible to, and what in turn should we be vigilant in to protect our relationship with Christ? She put this.
A good question.
This it's direct to me, but I'm going to put it in the chat here so you can see it.
Sure. I think one of the thing that comes to my mind immediately, and I may add to this as it comes to my mind later, I would say peer pressure. We want to belong and feel like we're not the odd one out. And that's okay if all your friends are true Christians trying to follow Jesus. But if it's not when they're not. So, and then that would be something you just gotta realize that I need to take this seriously. Either God is real or he's not. If he's real, then I gotta stand for it, even if others don't. I found most of my non-Christian friends are perfectly okay with me being a priest and all this kind of stuff. Mostly it's just the idiots who are not. And I don't care whatever the idiots say. You have to learn not to listen to the idiots, regardless of where they happen to be in life. Not who you feel are idiots, but sometimes you just got to stand up and say, no, if God is real, I want a real relationship. The other thing I'm concerned about is to give the gospel a real chance. Most of the time what happens is we really never learn, like I did with the Catholic faith. I learned the Mormon faith and I engaged it and I asked questions and all that. I think one needs to do that with one's own faith. If it's not Catholic, you need to engage it and ask good questions. Don't dismiss things because they're hard or because you don't get immediate answers. Really, really seek answers. And honest answers. Have a real conversation. We so easily in our present culture, and I was the same way when I was emotional, it's easy to dismiss the baby with the bathwater. Once I went to the Mormon faith, I easily said, this is stupid. Why did they teach me things that weren't this? And so I dismissed all the Catholic faith solely on emotional basis, never really investigating and really challenging these things. Most of the struggles you'll have with the Catholic faith through prayer and through really looking, you will find resolution with, for sure. The Catholic faith has always been engaged intellectually over the years. Some of the things we need to engage maybe a little bit more these days, but the problem is not that we have not sought answers. The problem is this, yeah, you have to engage it and think. is more what it is. I think the Mormon faith, the Catholic faith as well, but the more so. I look at the Mormon faith and all Protestant churches as Christianity in all its different forms. Catholicism is just Christianity plus. There's a whole bunch of things that we have that many of the other non-Catholic Christian faiths just don't have. And so I came to know Jesus profoundly in the Mormon faith. I came to a life of prayer and appreciation for the scriptures. As when I came to the Catholic faith, there was appreciation for the rest that's there, the sacred tradition, all these other things that are part of the Christian tradition for thousands of years. It's just I didn't have access to, because I didn't know about it. I mean, I knew about it nominally. I knew it was there, but I didn't have the sense of why. So asking good questions, keep asking questions and seek answers. And yeah, that's doing both of those things I think are important. You will all have questions within your heart that will come out when you engage this conversation. Ask those questions. Some of them will be as simple as I was when I came back to the Catholic faith, like asking questions like, I don't want to feel like I'm being mean to anybody, or I don't want to exclude anyone. So when I came into the seminary, why can't Mormons can get married? Why can't gay people get married? Why can't women be ordained to the priesthood? And then I asked the questions and go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. You see, the Catholic faith is not trying to be mean to particular groups of people. It is simply, along with the biblical tradition with our Jewish brothers and sisters, is just teaching principles that help you to live a good life in this life, but more importantly, to help you to prepare to live a full life with God in heaven. So with that, we'll just conflict with different things that we take. Oftentimes it's a perspective change to realize that we're talking about doing something that will help us be better. But the reality is God is real. When you go to heaven, it's very real. So you need to learn to toughen up, because if you're just kind of not learning to toughen up and not learning to deal with things that are a little hard, then you're going to have a hard time being in heaven, because God is very real, and he asks very real things of you. So it demands courage, and God will help you out. Absolutely. But the thing is, there's nothing wrong with asking questions as long as you seek answers, really seek answers and listen to the other side. You'll find that, oh, okay. Oftentimes it's not that we don't lack logic and understanding. It's not just simply you have to believe in something that emotionally, it's not true at all. There's very good reasons. There is a spiritual component to it, a faith that you haven't. I find what happens is you learn enough that you can say, okay, I can trust. And then as I do that, I realize, oh, okay, as I trust and live it, it makes a lot of sense. A lot of this stuff makes no sense if you don't live it. If you live it, you go, oh, that actually works. Like when I was swimming and I discovered you have to put over the shoulder in the right way, and also ask the lifeguard, is this the right way to go? Oh, yeah, it's the way you're supposed to swim. So, okay. But you don't know it until you do it. So there's these components in there. It seems wrong. And emotionally in the world, oh, that's all wrong because it doesn't make you feel like, yeah. But the thing is, though, it works. You'll realize when you work through the logic, it's not without logic. There's real reason for this. It's not being mean to people. It's just letting people know that this is not good. This is contrary to how we function as human beings. And that, so it's fascinating. And the church only asks what God asks. It's interesting when you get it. It's interesting when you look at the principles. There actually is a great deal of equity and fairness in it. But it asks the same of all people, regardless of orientation, regardless of whether you're male or female. It's just different how it manifests itself. So anyway, I've rambled for a bit, but I noticed questions were popping up. So you're going to have to moderate there, Mrs.
That's okay. You're doing great. And I think you sort of get into a bit of, I think you touched on some of Kathleen's of what were some of the specific things you later found in the Catholic Church you were seeking for in Mormonism. I think you answered that. The next one is so Mary Claire asks, as a former Mormon and a Catholic, how would you best recommend going about evangelizing Mormons? So they've had some conversations apparently with, I'm assuming there's some, maybe your neighbors or people in your community, Mary Claire, that's come and had conversation and ended up giving the Book of Mormon to your family and then invited your mom to their church later on. So that is her question.
I would suggest with the Mormons, because they truly believe and often will have had a spiritual experience of some sort, what they call their testimony, that this is true. And so they have an emotional attachment to their faith. So just realize, as much as you may have an emotional attachment to your own particular beliefs, that when you attack them in any way, that's not going to be very effective. Most people hunker down. That's why people react, whether it's a secular belief, whether it's a religious belief, what have you. I would suggest you have conversations with them. Mormons will agree almost 100% with your morality as a Catholic. You will find most religions in the world, almost all of them, will have a very similar, almost in the high 90s, comparability in terms of morality, how one should act to be a good human being. If you ask the question, who is God, that's where the incredible diversity includes. So with Mormons, that's a good question to ask. Who is God to you? Because to Mormons, God is very different than what we understand. 10-1, you probably don't understand who God is, according to the Catholic faith. So that's fair enough. We have all these different senses of who God is. Simply speaking, in the Catholic faith, God is the uncreated being who created all things that are. He's this unique being. Mormons don't believe that. And so part of it is they believe, though they believe in a God in that sense, and they use all the language that we use, like in the Trinity kind of language, but they don't believe in the Trinity as we do, that one unique being, there's one God, three persons, even though that is mysterious, hard to understand. But it's this real sense that an uncreated being is needed in order to create all things that are. All things that exist in this world, good, need to have an existence in their utter good and their ultimate good in God. So this kind of thinking that is common to all Christianity for the most part is not common to Mormons. They have an experience of revelation and understanding of God is very different. Yet in the midst of all that, they do good things. The practice of real Christianity in terms of the morality and living a life of prayer and such, their understanding is just deficient in certain ways. Mostly because they grew up after. The church began in 1830 officially, and a little bit before that. So they just came up in that period of time. What I find fascinating is that time they said there was no religion. So what the story is with Joseph Smith is that angels came to him and he was praying to find the true faith, and angels came to him and said to him, God the Father came to him in a vision, and that there is no faith on the earth that was his anymore. That same time in Europe, for sure, I remember St. John Marie Vianney was a contemporary of Joseph Smith at that time. He's the patron saint of priests in France. And around them were tons and tons of holy people, including St. John Marie Vianney. The Catholic faith was making people holy even then. But the thing is, though, when you become fundamentalist in your understanding that you want everything to be perfect, then what happens is a whole degree of religion where people just have to do it this way. With Mormons, for example, you have to baptize by complete immersion because that's what the Bible says. No, it is kind of, but not. The Bible actually is interesting how it talks about all that. But the thing is, though, there's these people who just want to be perfect. They want to have the church the way it was, how they think. And so there's a whole series of Christian churches, including the Mormons. But the Mormon had this unique experience about angels and the golden plates that were translated into the Book of Mormon. And there's a whole story that goes with that. So they believe all that mostly because emotional. There's no reasons why, there's no proof that these plates exist. They don't have them anymore. Things of that nature. So for us in our modern sense, there's not a lot of tangible proof. So a lot of their belief is very much belief without reason that way. So I would just ask good questions, and I would be friendly with them. They're good people, but the thing is, though, they actually believe in the Bible, but I don't know if they often read totally the Bible. I would say that's fair for many of our Christian brothers and sisters too, because they don't know how to handle like the Peter verses. They don't know how to handle the verses. I find the Catholic faith, what's fascinating me when I came back to the Catholic faith. So this is what Mormons believe, is that there was a great apostasy that happened that completed itself about the time of Constantine. So I believe that's about 400. And that kind of stuff. There was a great apostasy of the church, that the linkage of the church to Christ was broken in terms of authority, and then there was just all these false churches, basically, would be their understanding. And then in 1800s, it was restored to the angels of coming in and giving those particular people like Peter and the apostles and John the Baptist and stuff like that was a restoration is how they understand it. So truth was restored to them and the church as well. What was fascinating to me when I came back to the Catholic faith is I began reading the history of the church. And albeit, yeah, we were idiots at times, but we also carried the faith, good, bad, and ugly all throughout the history as human beings can be. The fact is that no, the faith and the lineage of the authority of bishops remained there. What's fascinating to me is what the Catholic Church teaches now is the same as it was taught in the time of Christ and afterwards, after the Bible was written and canonized and such. It's just bigger. It's like having a sapling. Now it's this big tree. So yes, with the big tree, you're going to have all these extra things, but it's the same tree. And what was fascinating to me is that they had this whole concern. And eventually what happened, they realized years later at the Council of Trent and afterwards that they began going back to the biblical roots, and all that they had taught and believed and carried through all the centuries, millennia, had actually, biblically speaking, was pretty much bang on. So it's fascinating. No matter what you say about the apostasy, the church was able to carry this stuff through. Now we have access to biblical things we never did during the 1,000 years quite the same way. It's just we have so much more access, we realize with the internet, but there's more to it than that. They just were able to get access to different things. As I studied that when I was at the seminary, I realized that this is the same. It's just bigger, it's grown more, but it's the same teaching. And that's mostly what happens. It's nothing the church necessarily changes teaching that is profoundly what it was. It just grows with it. And that's how it seems to have grown throughout the history of the church. So what's cool about that is that what we're saying is not that we perfectly understand everything Christ taught, but we've carried it with us, like through the veins of the tree. We just kind of have to come to understand, okay, what does this mean? And so as we come to these different ways of understanding the world, we just need to kind of how make it understandable to us in this present age. That's why asking those questions and making it your own and making sure that it links up, it vibrates in the same way. You go, oh, okay, this is the same thing. So it's interesting how the different things, the thinking that was going on through philosophy, the different ages and different things that were popularized ideas kind of come up and become more strong. To be fair, the church usually doesn't really do a good job to define itself until it's in the midst of a crisis about that particular thing. So what's interesting about our present time, I think it's the sexual crisis that we're going through right now will force the church to actually deal with that and bring the teachings. We've had some of that happen already with John Paul II, what's called theology of the body, just this great thinking of the tradition to help us to deal with these issues that we are facing in terms of sexuality. Would have been in the 1960s, but not right now. What's manifesting with identity and gender. I think a lot of that stuff will really, the church will have to deal with it because like any other human kind of institution, it really doesn't delve into deal with stuff until we absolutely have to. And that's, so I find that your children will have something more than what we have. And it's fascinating to me. I think it just takes time. That's how the church has developed over different teachings. It really has become strong and articulate because they just believed it. And then everybody challenged it. Then they had to say, well, this is why we believe what we believe. And they had to fight for it. And because of that, they really had a good sense of understanding. And as we do that in our present age with this, that's me. That's my personal opinion. But I think out of that will come in 100 years, just an amazing understanding of our own sexuality. Though I have to say, what John Paul II did by himself and with his studies was pretty amazing. But I think we need time to digest that and articulate it. Certainly a higher level than much of the different things people have been doing with gender and stuff and intellectually that they need to work on. Otherwise, the LGBTQ with their intellectual academic work needs to be much more thorough and challenged. Otherwise, you're just not going to have the thinking. And that way, we all get better. When we all challenge with very different ideas and ways, we become better in our understanding. That's my greatest fear right now with the LGBTQ movement is nobody can talk about it. Nobody can challenge it. And that just weakens them, which is not good for us neither. There are good things that LGBTQ people and their intellects, in their academics and people themselves needs to contribute. But they can't do that effectively unless they're willing to be challenged. Our faith, the Catholic faith, is stronger because people hated us and challenged us and mean words were said. But we got better because we had to learn to deal with that. Are they right? Or are we right? How do we figure this out? But it's hard, but in the end, we're better for it. So Anyway, that's my 2 cents, whatever it's worth.
Thank you, Father Mark. You always come around to on one question. You can get into lots of different discussions. Anyone else? So, you used to host or co-host a great podcast that Mrs. Parrott and I quite enjoyed listening to, called The Left Footers. And so you haven't done anything since July 2020 with that, and that's probably COVID related, but we appreciated those. I think there's 19 or 20 episodes that were done. What was sort of the impetus for starting that sort of podcast with that group that you're involved with? And
Well, it was originally started by Father Roger Nadelsky. He's a young priest. He started it because he wanted to engage the popular culture. So he did all sorts of things himself, and he's got a very strong intellect, but he just loves pop culture. As we went to Star Disneyland with him this week, we were all going crazy over Star Wars and all this kind of stuff and things like that. But the thing is, though, we need to engage the present culture. This whole notion that people these days hate religion is utter nonsense. The woke, if anything, show us one thing: they're religious to the nth degree in a crazy way. There is desire for religion. We just say, hey, make sure you pick good religion. There's a desire for people to be better. And sometimes they get focused in ways. I mean, I use the woke as an example because it's the most prevalent and the most negative in their extreme form. But the thing is, there's a great desire amongst people for the transcendent. There's a desire. My friend who went with me as well, what got him finally into his faith was Star Wars. His priest talked about that whole story. You either do or don't do with lifting of the TIE fighter out of the water and the Empire Strikes Back. And it really resonated with him. And he said, he's right. Either I got to be serious about this or I'm not. This pretending doesn't work. So it resonates. So there's wisdom I find all the time. I'm reading things or watching TV shows and I go, whoa. And I use the wisdom. Sometimes there's just kernels of real wisdom that resonates with our tradition. And it's how to make that accessible to people. The problem is people don't read it. People don't access it more than it is that it doesn't helpful. I mean, I look at the Bible, people tell me it's irrelevant. I said, have you read the Bible? Just out of Proverbs, just after the Psalms in the middle of the Old Testament, the very first sets of Proverbs deal with the issues of wine, women, and song. I said, oh my God, nothing has changed. We human beings, the world, our technology, all these things have changed. But we as human beings have the exact same problems they did in the Bible. And then all the jealousies and envies and all the struggles of that, they may manifest themselves differently. So the Bible actually is the most relevant because it's relevant to us as human beings. So is the tradition. It may be inaccessible or difficult to access because it's just not right there. But there's ways through popular culture and all that we can access and help people to get, oh, okay, I get that. That's what that's saying. And that gives them the key. Once you have the key, then the Bible just opens up for you and you realize it's an amazing book of literature, that God's revelation. But what's important to understand, though, too, is that the Bible is a narrative, kind of mostly narrative, but many types of literature. So it's one way of accessing. So something like the Catechism of the Catholic Church is more like a textbook, but helpful if you really are more naturally an analytical person, then reading maybe both in tandem or reading one for a while or finding a good spiritual book that you read with the Bible will help, because one approaches it as a story. So it's much like how I talk. Sometimes it's logical, but it can be all over the map, but connected. So it's just different. And there's different ways in which you can access the tradition. And there are wonderful books written by saints and others that are just wonderful ways to access pieces of the tradition. And as you read them and put them into practice, it'll kind of connect you with everything. It's good to know the map. So reading the whole Bible eventually in time, or just pieces of it, as long as you know the narrative and having a sense of what the creed means and the faith means, is a very good thing. Because once you have that, then you kind of know where everything's supposed to go. But then you just eventually learn the details of the map. So, but it's worth it. I just try to figure out, how do you get that to people to understand how it's worth it? That sometimes is the great difficulty. Once you get it, you get it. Go, oh, but once the mass opens up for you, it opens up for you. But sometimes people just have it, but they just kind of goes over them like water off a duck's back. So
I think that's why Father Mike Smith's podcast, podcast Bible in a year, and then now coming up the Catechism in the year, the popularity was beyond, I think, even his expectation, but it was that breaking down and small bits every day for people that
No,
hope,
no. You know,
you know,
I would
brought it
suggest
to
that
people.
Father Mike
Yeah.
Smith. I haven't listened to his podcast, but I've seen many people who have. I just have many podcasts, and so I only have so much time. But the Catechism in the Year, I was thinking of doing a catechism study in my parish, but his Catechism in the Year makes sense. He reads it, he explains it. But if you do that for a while, you go, oh, yeah, this is actually helpful. Because knowing the truth about God and yourself and how that all relates, and letting the story or the teaching of the Bible, but also the teaching of the church come alive to you, then you realize, oh, this is relevant and helpful in a very real way. It gives you structure to your soul and your life. So.
Exactly. So Zoe has a question. Do you have a spiritual reading book that you would recommend for us to read? You know, one of many.
Well, I'll. It sounds strange, but it's worth reading. I'll look up the exact name. It's a little bit of a title. Yeah, but all the young people that I've, high school students I've ever done this with, they're good. I would recommend reading the Bible, but don't try to read the whole Bible. Go pick a gospel. I would suggest Mark, he's simple, or Matthew, and just read it. Just don't read it to understand everything. Just read it like you read a novel, just to meet Jesus. Just to have that one goal, and you read the Gospels, will meet and encounter this Jesus guy. He'll say stuff you don't understand, but don't worry, the apostles had the same problem. But the thing is, though, after a while, he'll start to make a lot of sense. Or what will happen is that he will say something that makes total sense to you. You just have to arrive in that part of the story is where you kind of are in your life. But go do that. I highly recommend that. That's a good thing to do. And then after that, your teachers can recommend a narrative thing. If you do, I would suggest that maybe you do it. Read with Father Mike Schmitz. Go do his podcast. They all exist on the internet, so you can just start from there and just read with him. Because he'll read, but then he'll talk about it, and then okay, then it'll help to open up the Bible. Once you kind of have a little bit of understanding, it's amazing how much it opens up. And just knowing how to read it, that's all it is. By the way, it's the same thing as Shakespeare and other kinds of literature. It's just sometimes you just need to know enough that you go, okay, that makes sense. It was cool. I had kids one time. I was watching a Shakespeare movie, and little kids were going, what the heck is this? Because we as adults and you young people can make that cognitive shift. And that's all it is about the Bible. All of a sudden, you can be there several thousand years ago. Once you can do that, it'll open up to you. You just need to help to get that mindset of that time. And then you can take the time and the work to relate it to where you are right now. And that's neat. The Bible, the Catechism in the Year, I would highly recommend that. That'd probably be awesome. I'm definitely going to listen to him from the beginning. Don't worry if you don't listen to everything. Just listen to some of it. Just take the time. Just do it slowly. If it takes you years to listen to his year in the Catechism, that's okay. Just do it one at a time. But take it in pieces that you can handle. But listen and learn and try to live that kind of stuff. The book. Sorry, I was going to look it up for you. Just get the name. It's a bit long. It's of a philosopher, Blaise Pascal. Let me look up Amazon. There you go. The book is called Christianity for Modern Pagans. It's a great title. What it is, it's a collection of the thoughts of he's in French, it's pensées, I think I'm saying it right, of Blaise Pascal, but with Peter Kreeft. He's a philosopher, modern one. His commentary sounds like a wise father recommending this book to you. Every high school student I've ever had read the book, they just get, wow, this is amazing. Because the reason he did it for Christianity for Modern Pagans is because it deals with our present culture. And I'll just put the name of the book in there. There you go. By Peter Kreeft. Because he's done a study in university with students and all that. And what he does is he reads through these thoughts. And what happened is the 1600s is kind of the beginning of modernism, and it's also a way. So a lot of what you live in because that's the thing. No matter what you think, religion or philosophy exists. Whether you intentionally live or understand or choose one another, it's there. And modernism, materialistic philosophy is the one that's prevalent right now, that nothing is real unless it is material, that there is no meaning to life, that there's all random, all these things that show up. It's not science that's the problem for the Catholic Church, it's scientism. It's this belief that it's the only way to learn something. That's more what the problem is. It's not. But materialistic philosophy, and it comes out of modernism, is the air you breathe right now. Everybody kind of believes and lives as if it's true. And that's, I think, why young people these days are struggling, because we as human beings cannot live a life without meaning and purpose. So that's what the philosophy that kind of runs the world you live in. It ekes into everything that we think. They talk about stuff, but you just, oh, this all random. There's no meaning to it. There is no God. That's what it kind of says, but it's not true. Because, one, we are people of meaning and purpose, and you can begin to have that discussion, as does Blaise Pascal and there's other books that are out there, that no, the arguments for God are pretty strong. It's true that it's a leap of faith to believe in God, because the arguments only take you so far. You have to just say, okay, this is enough that I can believe in God. But equally so, an atheist is an act of faith too. You're just saying the arguments are not sufficient, that I choose to believe there is no God. The only true kind of fair is being agnostic. I just don't know. Which, fair enough. But both are leaps of faith. But what's fascinating about Blaise Pascal is you read through the book, your teachers can take a look at it. You'll see what I mean when you start reading it. You go, this is just, because it engages with these real questions you have in this modern age. But what's interesting, Blaise Pascal gives what he calls his wager, Pascal's wager. The wager is not that God exists or not. It's not an argument for God's existence. He just says that it's a better wager to live as if God does exist than it is to not. And he gives his argument for that, which is pretty brilliant, I think. It's interesting. There's an argument for faith. His basic argument is that if God exists and you live as if he exists and follow him and do what he asks you to do, when you die, you're good to go. You get great blessings. If God doesn't exist, then you've lived a really good life. If you live a life in which you live as God doesn't exist, you just do whatever the heck you want to, and then all the negative that can come with that, of course. If God exists, you're screwed. If God, then you're just, you completely gone your life in a direction in which will not help you out in eternal life. But if God doesn't exist, you've lived a bad life. You've lived a life of dissipation, and instead of a life of purpose and meaning, which I think most of us, to some degree, even young people, you realize, no, my life, when it has purpose and meaning, then I function as a human being. To me, that's one of the greater arguments for the existence of God. It's not a perfect argument, but why would we exist? If the universe is random and meaningless, why do we as human beings only function well when we have purpose and meaning? People will pursue it in all sorts of positive and negative ways, but we need that. So that's why we need to realize that. And then, okay, what is my greater purpose and meaning? What is that meaning and purpose you want from me, God? So that I grow to be my full potential, not just taking whatever purpose and meaning that I pour myself into. Because oftentimes people get stuck in very horrible negative things simply because it gives them purpose and meaning. And the Mormons did that for me too, and ended up to be negative, but because they gave purpose and meaning to my life, that helped me to feel comfortable and where I needed to be. But that's why I encourage you to think about your faith, and let God inform you so that your purpose and meaning is aligned with the best of who you are, to be the best version of yourself. But it also takes you to heaven as well.
Well, that is a great thought to wrap up today, Father Marc. Thank you so much for your hour with us today. And I don't want to keep you too much longer on your last day off here before back to work.
I worked this weekend already, don't worry.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay. They made you work this weekend. Okay.
By the way, priests work on the weekend. It was the funniest thing. All my friends could never figure this out. It's like, I don't know. I tell them I work on the weekend. I have no idea what long weekends are because I just get my day off on Monday.
This is true.
It's a great life, for sure. We work when you all are taking a break. That's how it works.
Yes. The day of rest is not entitled to priests, apparently. Dr. McClarney, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, can you hear me? Yeah, I just want to thank once again Father Mark for sharing with us today. So we can maybe give him a round of applause. Thank you very much. We have more questions we want to ask, but
You know,
maybe another time, of course.
no, that's why I'll just throw 2 cents in here. That's why I love doing podcast, because I really have seen in this long form conversation an opportunity to really have a conversation. And it's so much better to hear people talk about their thinking and then have them engage with people maybe that disagree and all that. But I think it's a good way to really have an opportunity to learn and hear good thinking and to go, okay, I can see where they're going with this, but also it challenges you. I love, and I think it's the way of the future in terms of how we need to have some of these conversations, these long form conversations. So
Yes, no, undoubtedly. And perhaps before we part ways, Father Mark, would you give us your blessing
of course, the Lord be with you.
and with your spirit?
And Almighty God, we ask your blessings upon these young people as their studies, but help them in their relationship with you, that they may grow closer to you and discover you anew every day. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.